Hello. We are live. So there we go. Welcome to this hour or so of meandering chit chat. Let me know, say hello, so that I can see who's on the live. It's always good to see who's here. There's 3 or 4 of you present, and we always get a delay before we get the chit chat coming up. But for those of you who may be watching this on playback after the live session, there, JF, hello. There are edited versions gently being put up in the playlist, live Q&A edited highlights, I think it is. So you may well prefer to catch up on that after the event. Kitty Chris, hello. Steve, hello. Sean, good to see you. Well done. Good to see you, Steve. So the edited highlights will cut out the chit chat and the meandering nature of what we're going to discuss in the next hour. Wonderful. We'll be here for 30 minutes. Okay, that's good. Well, I hope that's a good meeting, JF. Do enjoy that. Tess, nice to see you. What a nice smiley face. Barbara V, hello. Nice to see you. Good to see you. Mark, morning. Mark, morning. I thought you were in Cornwall, Mark. Maybe you're not. Jim, hello. From America there, Jim. Good to see you. Okay, so good to see you, regulars. Thank you very much. I know it's been a little while. No, obviously not in Cornwall. So it's been a while, and it's going to be another while after this one before our next one. Just to let you know, the next one will be on April the 26th, which is 6 or 7 weeks away. But it's just, life is so busy. Yes, you are, Mark. Good. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, I'll remember your little logo next time. So we've got a fair amount of time between these lives at the moment. Hopefully, you know, don't ignore the channel between times. Do dive in, and I will be hoping to sort of popularize it with videos, populate it with videos, not popularize, as we go through the weeks. Now then, it's going to be an interesting one today because there is a danger that this might kind of slide into farce, because I've got a very specific question that I want to answer, I want to address. It was asked of me a couple of weeks ago on Messenger. And the problem is that I don't want to mention, hello, Lucinda's 100, and Jenny, hello. Lisa, hello. I don't want to mention the subject of the question because my Twitter account was withdrawn fairly recently. I was never a great Twitter user, but what used to happen is that the YouTube videos would automatically be posted into Twitter, and Twitter decided in their wisdom that actually what I was talking about was, hello Stevie, and Myrddin, hello, was not suitable for Twitter. So you can guess what this is about. Today we'll be talking about the C word, and we will be mentioning the things that begin with V. And the reason I don't want to put these words in the chat or to actually talk about them is, hello, from Rome. Wow, well done, Frederica. Good to see you. Rome, love Rome. So I don't want to mention it. It sounds a bit absurd. It sounds a bit farcical. But we're going to talk around the basis of this question, and I'll give you a clue. You'll understand what the question is about. But I just don't want to be listed on YouTube's blacklist, if you like. I've had a few shots across the bow over the weeks, but it's a bit about censorship, and we'll talk a little bit about censorship. So, you know, we'll go into this, but let's not delve in too deeply, because really it's an interesting development, because it's a natural development. It's part of the whole kind of growing up of the internet and all of that. And what always happens in processes is that a certain set of regulation comes in to kind of just create a pathway that hits the middle stream, the mainstream acceptability of things. And that's really what's happening. Guess what I forgot to do before I came on live? Hello, Boykan from Monty. Right, let me just cancel that for a second. Oh, God. Right, so That's a first. I said fast, didn't I? I said fast earlier on. There you go. So, right. Okay. So we're not. I'm not going to actually express my opinion on the subject, the specific subject, either way, because I want to go into the background to the subject and why the subject is there, in terms of infinite possibilities, right? Infinite possibilities. And we're going to be covering a lot of the ground that we've covered before, but I don't see any harm in going back over stuff, and I will express it in a slightly different way. And hopefully there'll be some new people that will pick up new nuggets for themselves. And some of you regulars will see something differently and you get a little aha moment to really kind of sit alongside what you know and maybe join a few of the dots. So I'm just going to read the question, and I've sort of written it here in a way that hopefully you'll get the gist of it. The question from Bo this week was that she says, will the current process that many are taking up divorce the connection between ourselves and the management and past lives? So she comments that many people are suggesting that the process might be interrupting the God gene. And she asks, will our species amnesia be complete? In other words, this idea that we as a species have actually forgotten who we are, which I go along with, we definitely have. Is this part of that? And, you know, is that issue? Well, there's a lot of fear in this question. She goes on that many are commenting that their connections to clients for remote healing have been interrupted in those that have gone through the current process that we're not mentioning. And the other thing is she says, is whether this computer modeled thing has an effect on our soul and where it goes when we depart this world. I know these are big questions, she says, and they probably sound ridiculous to most people. But the point is, this person who's asking this question is very open-minded. She's in the alternative sector. She discusses a lot of what we discuss here on this channel, and she's concerned. And what she's seeing is evidence of people saying, look, the situation is this, things aren't working quite the same as they used to, these people have had blah, blah, blah. And is this all part of that, the way that this sort of dark energy around the world might be going? Right. The short answer is that I want to give to this person. Dixie, hello. Rosemary, hello. Good to see you all. Is no, it absolutely, none of this stuff that currently is going on at the moment is affecting us human beings on a soul level in the way that the question is being asked, right? This is, okay. I want to go into detail to discuss the thing that I'm not going to mention, which sounds a bit like something out of Harry Potter or Voldemort, but you know, the thing is that whether you're pro or against it, the thing is, it is simply an example of the fact that our technology has got to a stage where we can manipulate things very carefully and at a very, very small level. So we can do genetic manipulation. There we go, right? Just because it's a genetically modified thing doesn't mean to say that it is the curse of all ages and is going to affect the energy of a person per se. Because the thing that affects the energy of the person per se is the ultimate creator, is your spiritual self. Now we're going to talk around this because this is the fundamental of our connection to everything we do with our intuition and our way of seeing the world and of living in the world. And one of the people I want to refer to when we discuss this now is this guy. This is a book, The Self-Aware Universe. This is written by quantum physicist Amit Goswami. Now, this is actually quite old now. This is, I think it was printed in 1992. But this is a book about quantum physics. And I read this years ago. And it resonated with me to such an extent that it literally, when I finished it, it made me cry. Now, the thing is that what Amit Goswami does, he is not only a through and through scientist, he actually is a deeply spiritual person. And since 1992, in all the books that he's written, and I urge you to dig out as much as you can about Amit Goswami, ideally between now and the 30th of March, because on the 30th of March, I'm going to be interviewing Ami Goswami. So if you have questions that you want to ask him about the spiritual world and quantum science, then drop me a line or leave a comment. Hello, Liv, nice to see you. The author, again, Jenny, is Amit Goswami. So Amit Goswami. He's an Indian guy. He's actually retired as a lecturer now, as a professor, but he is through and through a scientist, but a deeply spiritual one. And his point is that, well, the subtitle of the book is How Consciousness Creates the Material World. So his point of view, his scientific point of view, is that consciousness, the ultimate creator, source, creates the world. Now you might be going, well, duh, we knew that. But yeah, we do know that. We understand that. That's what we intuit. That's what we live. That's how we generally live from that. Hello, Noah. From that point of view. But science doesn't. There's a lot of people in the scientific world that are materialists and think it's the other way around, that the material world creates the consciousness, creates this thing that appears to be conscious. So we just put that to one side. Let's come back to Amit Goswami. Because if we relate the fact that consciousness, the dog being extremely conscious, if you can hear him in the back, my wife's dealing with it. Yes, thank you, JF. Yes, indeed. Bless him. I think we just had a knock on the door, but I'm not going to get that as well. So it's good job I didn't have him in here with me today. So if we come from this point of view that everything, absolutely everything around us is conscious, and everything around us is a part of God, which is what Goswami is saying as well. And he's, as far as he's concerned, he puts forward very substantial scientific thinking that supports that. He uses the term, what does he use? There's no worry. I was going to try and show off there and use one of his terms. Entangled hierarchies. There you are. That's something to play with. About the way that consciousness, things evolve from consciousness. He calls it the hierarchy of structure. An upward and ascending hierarchy. But what I'm getting at is this level of fear that's expressed in this question, where there's inquiries about, well, can it affect our energy to such an extent, the current process that's sweeping the world, that it would affect the root of the soul on its journey back to source at the end of our lifetime? No, it just can't do that, because everything that is manifest here and now in our conscious awareness is either a choice. It's either a choice from our ego selves, creating and reflecting back, or it's a choice when we get into a deeper state of connection, literally the choice of God that is being shown back to us, that is on that reality that appears to us. So that reality, that choice of God exists there if we can connect through the healing modality. When we drop into the healing modality, we are, as far as Amit Goswami is concerned, going down through the quantum layer. So we're kind of, what he suggests is that we've actually got three selves as part of us as a human being. Just tell me if I'm losing you or if this seems completely irrelevant to the question. Hello, Tammy, good to see you. We have the ego self, which is what we recognize as the human being. And obviously that term ego is used in a lot of different spiritual thinking and a lot of different spiritual lessons and way of looking at life. What Amit Goswami tends to say is that, well, the ego self is that is that has learnt to behave and has learnt to be fulfilling its conditioned responses. So in other words, the ways that we have learned from childhood into adulthood to respond to things around us, to the ways in which we react when things happen, the ways in which, when a phone rings in the middle of a live on YouTube, do I fall apart or not? Well, kind of. That's conditioned response. That's like, oh no, what's going to happen? What's everybody going to think? Conditioned response. Reaction to something new coming into my awareness to make a choice of, do I want that or do I not want that? Fear, let's say that's fear. Well, there's or caution. Let's not go to fear straight away. Let's go to caution. One wants to be cautious about what are you going to have. All right. So that's an ego-based response. There's a process there. The second aspect of the self, in terms of yes, indeed. Well, in fact, look, I don't know your whole name. I'm not going to announce that. You told me what your name was earlier on from Rome. But the point is, it's not even meeting halfway. It's actually the spiritual side. Actually, is completely and utterly within the science. It's just that there's a whole bunch of people there that don't even accept there's a spiritual aspect to life at all. But actually, spirituality, as we'll see again in a minute, is the complete thing, and the objective aspect that is covered by science on the top is just the science on the top. It's not even halfway anymore. I don't even think of it like that anymore. Hello, lots of international things enmeshed. Yeah, kind of. Carlos, good to see you. Okay, good to see you. Hey, so. The second aspect is the quantum self. So you've got the ego self, you've got the quantum self. The quantum self is really where we go to and what we start to play with when we're doing the dowsing, when we're doing things like remote viewing. So Voican, Full Monty, very much into remote viewing and that idea of, astral traveling, out of body experiences, that sort of thing. So when we're doing that sort of stuff, and when we're doing the dowsing, as we use on this channel, you're accessing the quantum self, because that is a almost halfway house between the ego self and the, well, if we want to put it, the God self, which is, as far as Amit Goswami is concerned, what he terms as the non-local consciousness within all of us. So the reason that it drops into that third point is because that's a very difficult state of being to be in, and we can't be in it as human beings all the time. As we've said before, if we were in that state of awareness, that condition of the God self, that condition of being so immersed in the quantum reality of things, we wouldn't actually be human beings. But what we do is drop into it via the quantum self and then pull out information that we can then express using the ego self. Here we are as ego self. This is the macro environment in which we're living, primarily populated by the ego self, which runs on Newtonian physics. So what I'm saying is ego self is not to be ruled out, not to be banished. We don't banish the ego, we accept it. But each of these three parts of the human being interact at different levels and at different stages. And we want to get into the deeply important aspect of working with our reality via the God consciousness that is within us, then we have to do the work to get into that state of consciousness with which to connect to source, which is, believe it or not, through meditation and all of those things. Completely agree there, Tess. Yes. When I dismiss science, I'm talking about the mainstream people that are not actually scientists doing the work, are actually think they are scientific in their thinking, because actually what they are is just simply dismissive of spiritual stuff. That's my own bias and ego-centered self pushing them out of the way, which clearly is not a God-related aspect of me. So let's come back to this question from this lady. The issue of the question is all about fear. Now, that particular question. Now, Mark already has highlighted that he's anti the thing. And that's great, that's fine, not a problem. Because actually, the thing that we are all kind of either up in arms about or not, is it does not rely on his success in terms of influencing the state of the world through 100% acceptance of it. And in fact, it would appear to be a very good thing if not 100% of people actually take it. That's all I'm going to say in detail. I don't want to get carried away and start using words that are going to be picked up. Okay, cool, good, lovely. Well, I hope that's out in nature there, Boykan. Yes, he was, Stevie, absolutely. And in fact, really from 1992 onwards, it's where he started to formulate and consolidate his thinking. Stevie saying there, Amit was in What the Bleep. He was in a couple of other movies as well, I believe. And I think it's brilliant. What he's actually doing is he's got a newish, his most recent book is called Quantum Spirituality. I've started reading that, because I thought I'd better catch up on some of his more recent stuff before I talk to him. So he's got this book called Quantum Spirituality, but he's also really developing, he calls himself a quantum activist, because as far as he's concerned, he is really using the science to underpin and to highlight the things that we can experience and achieve through the spiritual viewpoint and the spiritual energy of living. But he can now say, right, this is the science. There's science to prove that. There's science to prove that. There's science to prove that. And of course, surprise, surprise. Nick, hi, good to see you. Surprise, surprise. He's mates with Dean Radin. Dean Radin. You know, the guy that's, again, another scientist who's very keen on looking into some of the more, I hesitate to use the word paranormal, but the more unusual aspects of being human. Dean Radin's book, most recent book, is called Real Magic, very worthwhile reading. So we come back to this lady's question all about fear. What I'm saying is the choice is not about whether one is fearful or not necessarily, because what I would recommend, as I always recommend for all of these things, is to sit with it in your own space. And this is where the power of meditation really kicks in. This is why it's so useful to connect to that spiritual self, that God part of self, which you can only do through meditation or through some other kind of altered state of consciousness. But in that state, to ask the question of self as to why, what do you want to do? What is the action you want to take? Yes, exactly, Jenny, exactly. Fear, everything being of God, everything being from source, everything that we encounter in the material realm being manifested from the subtle energies that are consciousness, means that fear is a part of what God expresses, because we are manifesting part of what God expresses in the physical form. So again, fear has a purpose, but one of the greatest purposes at the moment in this respect, in analysing a situation and analysing a process of decision making, is why am I being driven by fear? Do we want to be driven by fear? Is this other people's fear that is actually driving us and is creating a fear within ourselves? These are great fear-based questions. This is why fear is such a useful thing for self-analysis and self-development. If there's more questions on it, that's fine. The fear that is there is fundamentally around death, and this is one of the interesting things that I sort of observed for myself here, in terms of having been a storyteller in my previous job as a video maker and a writer, then looking at story structure. What we have in this situation that we are facing globally is by now it's about a year-long story that we've all been part of. We're all being following it through from inception over here, and highs and lows, and you know, all these sort of different scenes as we've gone along to reach the current moment. Yes, Rupert Sheldrake, yes, definitely. Now I will try and speak to him too. We'll try and get him on one day, hopefully. He's apparently a nice guy. So we got this story, we've got all of these scenes laid out. We've got Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and we're actually now in Act 3 of this current movie, right? This story. Now, if you think about story structure, if you think about movies, the way that they're structured is that the hero, heroine, traditionally called hero, travels from the start of the story through towards the climax of the story. Now, and on their way, they are overcoming obstacles, and those obstacles get bigger and bigger and bigger and more complicated. You would not have a story if you went through and the first issue that the hero encountered was the biggest issue that they're going to encounter in 180 minutes. That would be a really dull movie. You know, if James Bond, for instance, had the massive fight with the villain, killed the villain at the front, and the rest of it was just James Bond making tea and having a cigarette. You know, that's a really dull film. So what you have to have is the setup and the process so that it gets to the peak. Now, what's experienced here in this question is actually the ultimate fear, because not only are we talking about something that is concerning fear of death, but also the fear of what happens after we die. Is this thing so powerful that it's now going to affect that aspect of our reality? So that it's just another way of looking at it in terms of story structure, in terms of these archetypal energies that affect us day to day, and we're not even aware of them, right? So it's a good story structure. Actually, is a really interesting way of looking at life, of looking at your own process through life. There are all sorts of great. Okay, good. Sounds good, Rick. Good to see you too. Connecting consciousness. There you go. Yes, well, exactly. And this, of course, is exactly, fantastic, is exactly what the ego self is working with, because it's all these fear patterns from exactly this, from educational and collective patterns. So, brink, there it is. Okay, so I accept it's nothing to do with survival and the five senses, but it's you know, the subconscious being the integral part of the human being is massively powerful, massively powerful. Now, can I just, I mean, you might hate this, but whatever. I was sort of thinking of when did similar fears, strike us as a population, as globally. And if we go back 200 years, I always think it's a funny one that always stuck with me right from when I first learnt about it. Which is dear old Robert Louis Stevenson with his invention of the rocket and train travel. And so 200 years ago, there was a little clip, a little extract here, a couple of sentences that I just picked out earlier on today, just to heighten this, because I wasn't even sure. I thought, I remember, hearing that people were terrified of the idea of traveling in trains, this new technology. I remember this as a kid. So I thought, I better just double check that it was actually true. And in fact, it actually said this website that I went to today, it was a decent website. It wasn't, some kind of arbitrary thing, but it just said, many people feared that the speed and vibration of rail travel would prove to be bad for people's health and perhaps even be fatal. Others worried that by enabling poor people to move around the country, the new railways could be a threat to law and order. Cheers, JF. Take care. See ya. And that second sentence actually is a classic, is what I think is, others worried that by enabling poor people to move around the country, the new railways could be a threat to law and order. Now, also apparently there were issues about the lunatic asylums, as they were then called. Perhaps the railway system would enable lunatics to escape more quickly. They could disseminate themselves around the country more quickly, which is like, why would you even be thinking that? But these were the fears at the time, and what we see now are the fears of our time. Very, very different circumstance, very, very different picture. Yes, indeed. Yes. Well, and that's another good one. That's another good one, isn't it? Because the American Indians picked up on that. And actually, Chris, it's nice that you mentioned that photography sort of aspect, because I mentioned about my Twitter account being withdrawn earlier on. And if we think about censorship in that sense, new things. So the invention of the cinema, right? So cinema was invented, again, late 1800s. Thomas Edison had an integral part in that. He used it to make some little movies. And in fact, Edison, in 1896, he made what was regarded as a very risque film. It's come to be known as The Kiss. It was called something else, full title. But it's this little movie, very short. And I'm just going to read this bit. It says, the film contained the very first kiss on film with a close-up of a nuzzling couple followed by a short peck on the lips. The kissing scene was denounced as shocking and obscene to early moviegoers and caused the Roman Catholic Church to call for censorship and moral reform. Kissing in public at the time could lead to prosecution. So censorship on new things. So this is what we were saying about the internet being censored. It's unfortunately at the moment we haven't got the church kind of laying into it, but let's not get too upset about it. Let's use it. Let's work with what we've got. Let's work within we can rebel and shout and all of those things as if we wish to. I'm not saying any more about that because again that'll get highlighted and picked up on. But the point is to pick one's fights and to be very, very certain about where your motivations and your drivers are coming from. But on this channel, really what we're concerned about is actually the motivation and the act of going through experiences to learn and grow in that process, which we call life. Now, some of the time when we get influenced by those around us, which we all do, sometimes then all we're doing really is falling into that trap of, well, this is gossip. No more than gossip. If somebody says, oh, well, I was doing some healing on somebody and it wasn't sticking and blah, and somebody says, oh, yeah, I've done that, so and so. And oh, yeah, somebody else chirps in and says, oh, yes, I've had the same thing happen. Do you think it's due to X, Y, Z? And what you got there is a little, everybody, three people, social cement. They're forming the little group. They are being human. We are a naturally group. We revolve around groups, most of us. Some of us not so much. So, but naturally we're sociable. And so these little niches of agreement form. But the danger with those niches of agreement is that actually they're creating an attitude to life that actually has no foundation. It's just opinion. There's nothing wrong with opinion, but if it then drives a tidal wave of unnecessary anguish, what's the good of that? And what we've got now is a platform across all the social media platforms that can drive unnecessary anguish, or it can drive the other, which is really what Rick was saying there with connecting consciousness. I'm guessing. I don't know the website itself, and what we're trying to do here, and what we're trying to do in the embryonic other YouTube channel, Your Home Heals, is to actually create the rolling wave of positivity. They're seeing that actually there's a heck of a lot of good that we can do, a heck of a lot of good stuff being a human being at this time. It doesn't need to feel that we're living in a depressing and out of control environment. Can equal drama. Sorry, Tammy, do you want to expand on that? I'm not sure which aspect of what's being said you're picking up on. So you know how quite often I feel as though I just get on my soapbox. Has any of this actually been of help in terms of penny drop moments for any of you? Or does it sound like just me ranting again? I know I've lost a few people, it doesn't matter particularly, but Opinions. Oh, opinions can equal drama. Yes, indeed. Yes, yes. And also there is that underlying aspect of human beings that always find danger interesting, because it's thrilling. There's a, that's why it's danger. If danger isn't, okay, cool. If danger hasn't got an element of thrill, then it's not dangerous. And that's so thrill, adrenaline, and all of that lot. You know what I mean? So I mentioned, I've talked quite a lot, sort of touched on quite Amit Goswami, the physicist, quite a lot. And I just want to sort of go into talking a little bit more about some of his fundamental beliefs. Oh, bless, Ellen. Okay, take care. Rosemary, yes, okay, thank you. Thank you. Because these are interesting sort of foundation stones of ways to look at your own life and to ways to see that the spirituality can have a logical and well, okay, I'll use the word scientific basis. I like science. I like science. I don't object to science. I've always said, and I always have felt, that science gives a logical process with which to analyze and understand. For me, it doesn't for everybody, and it needn't for everybody. I'm just one of those people that wants to understand, and so my frame of reference goes back to the science, because it's all very well getting the knowing and the intuitive stuff, but I want, in order, certainly over the years, in order to build my confidence in what I was getting, I wanted to understand how it could be possible, and so that's why science to me has been there. I'm crap at science at school. Good, excellent, Stevie. So, but that's why I find it fascinating. No, I don't find it fascinating because I was crap at school. I find it fascinating because it provides a logical framework with which to analyze the experience that one can have. And I completely get that some people just don't want to be analyzing it and just want to go with it and to experience it and to build like that. And that's terrific. Absolutely terrific, because that means that at those times you're 100% in that flow, and you're certainly, in terms of those three aspects of person, ego, quantum self, and the God self, you're certainly there linking over between the quantum self and the God self, I would have said. So Amit Goswami's sort of fundamentals, as I understand them, and I might be slightly incorrect on these. He will correct me without a doubt when I speak to him. But he says, as we've said, this manifest world is created from the subtle energies. It's created from consciousness. Reincarnation is possible. Reincarnation is absolutely vital to the role and to the idea of everlasting spirit. Even, just even saying that, it conjures up the picture of the wave on the beach, because the idea of the everlasting aspect of spirit that just continues through. The ins and outs of reincarnation, we don't know. Of course we don't know. We'll find out when we get there. But it's interesting that Amit Goswami says, yes, reincarnation, absolutely one of the big fundamentals. Now, of course, that doesn't sit well with a lot of traditional religions, but that doesn't matter. We're not talking about religion, we're talking about spirituality. The three aspects of the ego self we've talked about: the ego self, the quantum self, and the non-local consciousness, the God self. Oh, okay, so the aspects of the quantum self that are really important, that don't exist in the ego self, is really in the ways that communication is possible. And we know as healers, house healers, there are some of you from the house healing group present, we know that sometimes the healing is simply instant, and we know that we can be connected to somebody else's mind, to their thoughts instantly, irrespective of distance. And that is because there is no signal going between one and the other. For a signal to exist, it means that it is limited by the laws of physics, which says that it can only travel at the speed of light, therefore is not instantaneous. But in the quantum realm, information passing does not need a signal, it simply is. There is no time delay. And so many of the things that we can experience when we're working for somebody else or working with somebody else, such as the telepathic link, they can be on the other side of the world and you still get their thoughts instantly, or when you're investigating the subtle energies, the subtle influences on somebody's life, that things come to you as the healer. Those have to be coming through the quantum realm, the subtle energies realm, because there is no other way for them to appear to the individual. So those are aspects, those are characteristics of the quantum self, and those get magnified. You get more and more of that sort of non-Newtonian process, the more you get connected to the non-local consciousness of self, the God self. Okay, and that's all Ami Goswami. It's right in there. The world is created by the ongoing process of creation. Say this so many times. I don't know what creationists think, I don't know what the religion is or what the process is of creationism. And I have no idea whether this is fundamental to that way of thinking. But this is absolutely crucial, is that the world around us is created in an ongoing process. Constantly refreshing, which is why it's constantly referencing our choices, whether our choices are conscious or subconscious, the constant reference of our perception and our energy, because that's how it works. One of the really interesting things that I'm definitely going to be talking to Amit about is that he says that his first example, the first time I heard this was when he was giving a lecture and standing at a lectern in front of a group of people, a whole bunch of people. And he's saying, right, if we had a really accurate laser tuned and honed in onto the center of this lectern, and let's say there was a person in the audience called Fred. So Fred is operating this laser, and they've got a measurement on that laser onto this physical object, the lectern, and Fred blinks and then opens his eyes again straight away. Then the measurement of that laser would be slightly different. There it would be for Fred, he slightly have changed in that moment where he blinked and then opened his eyes again, because his role of observing, his role of interacting with the physical realm would have slightly changed. And that measurement for that laser would be slightly different for everybody, every person. I think this is right. Every person in that room. Now, what he's saying is that measurement, that distance, that change of distance is so tiny that it is imperceptible in this macro environment using our senses. So we have no idea that the tiny variation in location, in position of that lectern is any different for Fred than it is for Jane, shall we say. But it is. So, and according to quantum physics, that's absolutely appropriate and acceptable. So what he's saying there is that there are these tiny, tiny shifts and differences, measurable differences in every single person's awareness. Now, if that's not mind-bending, and this is exactly what we've talked about before, then I don't know what is. That's nice, Chris. Jenny, that's nice. Can you, Chris, what are you saying up there? Heraclitus, you can never step into the same river twice. Yes, absolutely. And indeed, the world is never in the same position in the universe twice, which is always interesting. Now, so the world is created by this ongoing flow, wrestling our choices and our decisions, whether they're conscious or not. And the problem is, if we remain in the ego self and we are observing our situation and the energies around us and the things that are influencing us, then very often we can't even see the limitations that are on us at that point, because we are coming from ego, and the ego is constructed by, as we've said already, constructed by the limitations and restrictions of our beliefs that we have gathered around us in order to function in the world. So an example of that might be if you take a young person who is, let's take them late teens, for example. So maybe they're really guilty or shameful about their sexuality. Let's say, now that individual, if he wanted to be, or she wanted to be, changing their sexuality and changing the way that they were in life because they simply were finding it just what they were pretending to be was not truly them, one of the box restraints, one of the restraints of their world would be the limitations of any authoritative figures such as parents. And if their belief was that their parents would be so absolutely horrified that they would be disowned, then this would be a limiting factor. They wouldn't be able to make a choice or to even consider that they would be able to, that there was an option to that concept of potentially being thrown out, cast out of the family. Do you see what I'm saying? Maybe this isn't a good example. What I'm saying is that person would see no option but that one outcome, that if they announced their sexuality was different from what they were pretending to be, that they would be cast out of the family. That is the only option they see. So every time they think through this problem, that bounces off the walls, that just stays there, that's that. So you don't even think about that because that's the given, that's the unchangeable. But actually the whole point is that as you step further and further away in your mindset, away from the ego self, you go into the quantum self, and the closer you can get to the God self, that role of non-local consciousness that has infinite access to the infinite possibilities that your world can create and change into, then the more freedom you are enabling yourself to have. The boundaries disappear. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I guess what I'm trying to get at there, in that sense, is that we so often intellectually accept that we live in a limited world. We create a limited world. We are human. We create a limited world, but we can't see our own cage, and that means that we can't. If we can't see our cage, we can't ask the questions that enable us to find the key to that cage. Somebody else can probably see the cage for us. I think the thing about these aspects of, I feel like there was something else I should have mentioned from Ami Goswami, but it'll come up. No, I definitely feel there's something missing. Anyway, so the thing is that, yeah, these three aspects, the three parts of the self, are constantly intertwining. You know, obviously the God self is sort of sitting there at the bottom of everything, sort of fluctuating in and out, and the ego and the quantum self, depending on your sort of spiritual practice, are going to be fluctuating and meshed in different degrees. And obviously, if your aim is to be enlightened, then you will be trying to access the God self as much as you can, one assumes. Yeah. Boundaries disappear because our consciousness shifts on a cosmic level. Yep. Yep. Because, yep. I love it. I mean, I love your comments because everything around us is infinite potential, infinite possibility, and so as you shift, you access a new awareness, there is no boundary. There is not the old boundary because they used to call it quantum leap, didn't they? Quantum healing and all that stuff. Shift. You can do it yourself, Tammy, too. Yeah. Well, that's the other way of looking at it, Jenny. Yeah, being in a cage with the door open and choosing to stay trapped. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And there are also many, many reasons why. And that's kind of like you see your own cage, but you still choose to stay where you are, even if that's not a conscious decision. But the subconscious will sometimes keep you there because it's way too risky to come out of that cage because it's not what you're familiar with. Might be dangerous out there. I've just written something here. I'll read it as it is what I wrote this morning when I was just making a few notes. It says, the ego self identifies with separation because it is separate, held in trauma form. The quantum self and the non-local consciousness self are not separate from anything in reality, because everything in reality comes from the same stuff. It's made of stuff that can reflect back an infinite variation of form. So this is, again, something that Amit Goswami says, is that actually what we experience, and I think I said this earlier on, what we experience is God. This is God showing, reflecting back to us. It's kind of coming in and out and back. I've used the word God a lot today, and I'm feeling increasingly more comfortable with using the G word. I guess maybe because I've put down a lot of ground between me and what I used to think God was. Yeah. What do we think? What do we think, folks? Have I answered this lady's question, I suppose? I've answered the soul aspect. There's no issue there at all. And I think the point being that we've explored the way that we can have things coming into our awareness. But you see, as these things come into our awareness, if we're not aware of what they're sticking to within us, then nothing changes. So if we want things to change, if we want the world to respond differently, we have to respond differently, and therefore we have to identify what it is that the crap sticks to in us and creates a different, creates the responses that it has done and traditionally does. The living and breathing really in alignment with understanding and feeling that the world is infinitely variable, that your reality can be infinitely, just can be infinite possibility, is incredibly difficult. I think it's incredibly difficult for the reasons that we've discussed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so you're looking at it as a cosmic consciousness. Well, yeah, but the cosmos comes from God. God, yeah, and I accept that goddess is equally applicable. I take the masculine aspect off the word God, but goddess is equally applicable. But the cosmos is created from that. Yeah, deep cosmic consciousness, divine source. Yeah, exactly, and that takes the label off it. But the point is that it still is the infinite manifesting aspect of reality. So, and that infinite aspect is within every single person. That's what is really interesting. See, there's no reason why history, I think we may have touched on this before, Tammy, you'll probably remember we did. No reason why history actually is a pure isn't a pure fiction. Again, if we look at life as story structure, you've got James Bond, or you've got your hero on his sorry, again, it's male orientated, but his or her journey in the film, what they call the backstory is what got them to that point when all the action started, when the story started. There's no reason why history isn't simply the imagined, let's put that in brackets, the backstory of our existence. But again, Ami Goswami has some interesting things to say about memory and the role of memory So we'll talk a little bit about, if we have time, to him about memory and the role of that and how that sits with creation. See as God sees. Yes, yes, yes. And feel as God feels, I guess. See, feel. We are the infinite observer. He is, she is, it is the infinite observer. Curious about the quantum interpretation of feelings, since they seem to be my cage. Okay, more so than ideas. Does the ideas make the feelings happen, or vice versa? Well, that's a good question again for Amit Goswami, in a way. This thing that we called entangled hierarchy was sort of like okay, so there is a question in science. Let's see if I can get this right. There is a question in science about, it's the chicken and egg thing, and which is what you're asking, Kinney Chris. Which comes first, the idea or the feeling? The issue is the chicken and egg, which came first, the chicken or the egg. But in science, it's DNA and proteins, because DNA is required to make proteins, and proteins are within DNA. So how does that work? And that's an actual scientific paradox that science doesn't have the answer to. And so if we think of that loop, that entangled loop, do you remember there's a drawing, isn't there? Is it Dura or somebody? I don't know. So there's a left hand drawing, right hand. That's the other. Jenny, you'll probably know that, and other people, other artists orientated people. It's a very famous painting, left hand drawing, right hand, or the right hand drawing. Esquire, there you go. Right, probably pronounced wrong, but I would say Esquire. Which again is drawing which? How can that be? And that again is that's a visual. Thank you. That's a visual interpretation of exactly the same thing, chicken or the egg. And so in that sense, Kinney Chris, it's they both do both. The feelings create the ideas create the feelings. It's an entangled circular. One doesn't exist without the other in this realm. And then again, so when you talk about God, so is God a self? Is it in a God? We can't even hope to answer what God is or goddess is, but it is likely that it is just is. It is self. There's a mystical symbolic thing, the Orubus, which is the snake eating its own tail, which forms the eternal circle. And that is that sort of process. And it's very likely that our reality is exactly that, formed and continues to be, and forever will be, and forever has been, but maybe never is and never was. It's all just now. What do you think? Okay, so we'll have to draw it to a close, but if there's any last questions. So it's all been very philosophical and kind of that sort of stuff, meaning of life stuff, but it's all good stuff, isn't it? Talking about consciousness. Yes, Orubus. I would probably say it wrong. It's great. It's a really powerful image. Any last questions? We haven't talked much about dowsing, but that's okay, because we talked about other stuff. Dowsing really is just the kind of an action tool. Thank you. I think it's fascinating. I really do think that all of these, the way that science is examining and pulling apart consciousness, is absolutely fascinating. So do have a little Google around. I've put together a playlist of some of Amit Goswami's chats. Yes, you need to be in a different space to the day-to-day headspace, Rosemary. So in terms of the three aspects that we've talked about, the ego self, quantum self, and the non-local consciousness, the God self, then really you want to be dropping into the quantum self aspect, which is removing the you have to interview also. I don't know who that is. Can you pop a link or pop it in a comment, please? And yeah, so not ego self, because ego self is like the day-to-day bumbling around and your mind's all over the place. Be nice and grounded and do a little bit of meditation before you, if you're having trouble dowsing, then do that, and then you'll be dropping into the quantum self. Okay. Yes, Kenny Chris, if you, I will try and put a link to it. In fact, I will put a link to it below this. I'll do that as soon as this is processed. It takes a few hours for these lives to process. There's a channel called Your Home Heals, and Your Home Heals is a platform for those that are in the house healing network. That these are people that I've trained. There's some of them present. And they will have a presence on YouTube. They've got their own channels as well. But the point is that we want to get a consistent view on the world, to accept that the outer environment has an influence upon us, and to accept in the same way as that Oribus that we affect that too, but also to look at the home as a concept of being the world, the wider environment. So Your Home Heals is about not only connecting people to the earth in their own home or place of work, but also in terms of connecting as many as possible, along with everybody else that's doing this, connecting as many as possible to the idea that the environment is interconnected. We may be on the verge, I would say, of an extinction event. I'm not as pessimistic as Mr. Attenborough over here in the UK. He's a very well-known and knowledgeable naturalist who is determined that we are in the midst of an extinction event. And of course, if we look at it in one way, then we might be. But everything is always left to the last minute in this realm, and it will not happen as long as we maintain a consistent wave of progress to connect to the heart source, through the heart to source. And so that's what the channel's about. Your Home Heals. I don't know whether it'll show up on any search engines yet. There's no content, but there will be soon. So if you find it, pop along and okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Good. Yeah, okay. If you want to read about Ami Goswami, pick up that book, Self-Aware Universe, or his new one, Quantum Spirituality. If you want to learn more about or read, if you haven't already read the co-authored book that I put out a few years ago, Spirit and Earth, pick that one up. Both available from Amazon. I know some people hate Amazon, but quite frankly, if I was dealing with individual orders from here, then I wouldn't be doing anything else. Put the link up, Tim, for Your Home Heals. Thanks. Yes, I will, Sean. I will. Very good. So hopefully see you all next time. 26th of April. Sorry it's that long. By that time, we will have the interview up for Amit Goswami. Do dig that out. It should be absolutely fascinating. I'm really excited about it. Well, indeed, that is part of the point, Godfrey. That is part of the point. That is part of the lesson that we're trying to get out there, or the understanding that we're trying to get out there. Okay, bless you all. So we're going to be going now. Take care. Thanks for being here. See you soon. Bye-bye.